There are stories that gently whisper from the corners of the unknown, stories that defy logic, blur the boundaries between life and death, and leave behind only questions and chills. This is one of those stories. It begins not with a grand revelation or a sudden miracle, but with a small boy, a child like any other. A boy who loved airplanes, who played with models, who giggled in the sunlight, but who also screamed at night, terrified, drenched in sweat, crying out for a life he was never supposed to remember. His name is James Leininger, and what he would soon say, what he would soon remember, would change his family's life forever, and challenge everything we think we know about memory, soul, and time. This is not a fictional tale. It is not an internet myth. It is a documented case, followed by researchers, journalists, and even military historians. At the center of it is a boy barely 3 years old, yet speaking with the clarity of a fallen World War II pilot, naming people he had never met, great describing places he had never seen, and remembering with frightening detail how he died. Some call it imagination, others call it reincarnation. But no matter what you believe, one thing is certain. This child remembered a life that was not his own. It started when James was just 2 years old. At first, they were just dreams, strange, vivid dreams that made him restless. But they soon turned into something darker. Almost every night, his parents, Andrea and Bruce Leininger, would be startled awake by the sound of James screaming. They would rush into his room and find him kicking, thrashing, trying to escape from something invisible. He would cry out in terror. Airplane crash. On fire. Little man can't get out. Always the same words, always the same fear. Andrea, his mother, tried to comfort him, gently rubbing his back and telling him it was just a bad dream. But James would shake his head, sobbing, eyes wide and distant, as if trapped between two worlds. At first, they thought it was just a phase. Maybe he had seen something scary on TV. Maybe it was the imagination of a bright little boy. But the dreams didn't stop. And then, James started talking. Really talking. He began naming things, specific things, words no 2-year-old should know. He spoke of a plane called a Corsair. He said it had problems with the tires. He said he flew it during the war off a boat, a big one, called the Natoma. His parents were confused. None of this made sense. James had never seen a Corsair before. He had never been on a boat. He was just a toddler. How could he know these things? Then one day, while playing with a toy plane, James slammed it nose first into the coffee table and said quietly, "That's how it happened. My plane was shot down." His mother froze. That was the moment she knew. Something was deeply, terribly real about all of this. James's parents were not the kind of people who believed in the supernatural. His father, Bruce, was especially skeptical. A former Christian and military man, he dismissed the idea of past lives or reincarnation as nonsense. But as the days passed, James's memories only grew more specific. He began drawing planes over and over, always the same shape, with enemy fire and a man trapped inside, going down in flames. When Andrea asked him who the man on the plane was, James responded plainly, "Me." He also began referring to Jack Larson, saying he had been there with him. When asked who Jack was, James said, "He was my friend. He was on the boat too. The boat, always the boat." And that boat, James insisted, was called the Natoma. He would say it over and over, with perfect pronunciation, Natoma Bay. Bruce decided to investigate, if only to prove it all wrong. He began researching World War II ships and air squadrons. To his surprise, there was a USS Natoma Bay, an aircraft carrier that had served in the Pacific during the war. He dug deeper. There was indeed a pilot named Jack Larson listed on the Natoma Bay's crew manifest. And then came the most chilling discovery of all. There had been a pilot on that same ship, killed in action near Iwo Jima. His name was James M. Houston, Jr., a young Navy fighter pilot whose plane was shot down and crashed in flames. James Leininger, the boy, had never heard this name. And yet, he had described the man's death, the plane, the boat, and even the friend who survived. Piece by piece, the impossible began to look more and more like the truth. What are the odds? A toddler with no access to war history, no reason to invent these names. Describing events from 6 decades earlier with haunting precision. Bruce was no longer skeptical. He was shaken, and for the first time, he began to believe his son wasn't just having nightmares. He was remembering. By now, James was 3 years old, and what he remembered went far beyond dreams. He began sharing technical knowledge that stunned even aviation experts. He could identify parts of the Corsair, the aircraft flown by James Houston, Jr. He knew where the drop tank was located. He knew that Corsairs tended to veer to the left on takeoff, a flaw known only by trained pilots. Bruce tested him casually, gently asking questions only someone with real experience could answer. And the boy never hesitated. He even recalled painting the numbers on the nose of his plane. He said his plane had been hit by the Japanese and that it crashed into the water near Iwo Jima. When Bruce checked historical records, he found that James Houston, Jr. had in fact died during a mission near Iwo Jima in March 1945. Even more astonishingly, when shown a map, little James pointed to the exact location where the plane had gone down. He also knew the names of fellow crew members, not only Jack Larson, but others, men he had never met, whose names matched the USS Natoma Bay's records. And then came the moment that left even the skeptics silent. James's father found a black and white photograph of James Houston, Jr., taken during the war. He showed it to his son without context. The little boy stared at it for a moment, then said softly, "That's me. That's me when I was big." There was no excitement, no performance, only a quiet certainty, as if looking into a mirror from another lifetime. At that point, the Leiningers could no longer call it coincidence. The names, the plane, the drawings, the nightmares, the behavior, the photograph, all pointing to a single, impossible truth. This boy, born in 1998, carried the memories of a man who had died more than 50 years earlier. As the months passed, the Leiningers no longer questioned whether James's memories were real. They simply lived with them. Andrea, the mother, began reading about reincarnation, something she had never truly considered before. She looked into the work of researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson, who had documented over 2,500 cases of children around the world recalling past lives. Suddenly, their son wasn't alone. there were others, other children, other echoes. Bruce, once a man of strict faith and skepticism, found himself caught between worlds. The facts he had uncovered were undeniable, and yet his beliefs were being challenged in the most intimate way by his own child. He began to open up, not just to possibility, but to wonder. He even reached out to veterans who had served on the Natoma Bay, asking them about James Houston Jr. Some of them remembered the man. They confirmed the details, his mannerisms, his fate, the final mission. And they were astonished to hear that a child born more than 50 years later knew them too. For James, these memories didn't come with fear anymore. They began to fade, gently, like a dream that had been lived and finally released. By the time he turned 6, the nightmares had mostly stopped. The drawings ceased. The names came up less often. It was as if that chapter, the one from another life, had finally been honored and was now ready to rest. Still, the family never forgot, and neither did the world. James's story spread across news outlets. He and his parents were interviewed by journalists and appeared on national television. Their case was even turned into a book, Sole Survivor, the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot. But fame was never the point. The Leiningers shared their story not for attention, but for truth. To offer a window into something we still don't understand. To remind us that life may not begin and end the way we think it does. Some people believe in past lives. Some believe the soul is eternal. Others don't believe at all. But sometimes a story comes along that doesn't ask for belief. It only asks to be heard. James Leininger was just a child. He didn't know about war. He didn't know about Japan or Corsairs or the Natoma Bay. And yet, for a time, he remembered what it felt like to die in the sky. He remembered the fire, the terror, the friendship, the name he once had, James Houston Jr. Today, James is an adult. He's moved on with his life. He rarely speaks of the memories anymore, but the echoes remain in his family's heart, in the veterans who listened and nodded silently, and in those of us who wonder, who feel a quiet chill when hearing his story. Could it be true? Could a soul return again and again across time? We may never know for sure, but if you close your eyes and listen carefully, you might just hear the whispers, echoes of past lives, waiting to be remembered.